All right. I figure there's a way to adjust the video. Yeah, I don't want to show my entire room. Huh. Is there no way to set up the video settings? Maybe not. Let's see if I can't find some settings for this, right? Let's see what I can't do here to adjust settings. Yeah, that's not going to work too well, is it? I'm going to need bigger green screens. Wow, that quality, especially when it's dark. I didn't realize how off center I was either, because I usually try to adjust when I'm streaming to Twitch. I can adjust the video view. Hello. I see we have some people jumping in. Welcome. Trying to experiment with Go Live. I typically stream games on Twitch and then I pre-record my videos for YouTube. But I wanted to try to put some stuff together. Hey, Soaring Eagle, great to see you. This is new for me. I'm trying to adjust my settings here since I've got some stuff over here next to my books where I am trying to, I guess, clean my room, but I've got a whole bunch of boxes I'm moving around and I don't really want to show all of that on the stream, but I've got a wide camera lens here with my creative webcam. Takes time to adjust all the things, right? Exactly. That's what I'm talking about. Hello, Rob Graywolf. Welcome. How are you? Yeah, I have no idea how to do adjustments on the actual video feed itself, which I figured there would be some sort of an option, I thought, but I guess not. Guess I'm just going to have to show off part of my messy room, which is going to obviously make my wife stay because she loves when I show off messy rooms. I'm joking. She doesn't. She hates it too. Yeah. Would have to like stand here like this the whole time holding it, which would be fun. Yeah, this is supposed to be a test, a combination between seeing how Go Live would go for my PC. I'm good. How are you? I'm doing pretty good. Not too bad. Just trying to add some more to my channel here. With YouTube, I've tried to get back to releasing videos weekly. My viewership has gone down, and I was trying to find new ways of engaging with my audience. And I figured talking about subjects that folks are interested in, as well as just having general chats that are live and more interactive might be a little bit more fun. Recently, I've been spending a lot of time researching some of the sagas and eddas. I've been looking into exploring the idea of trying to learn more about the Old Norse language because I wanted to start reading them in the actual source material stuff itself. I've also been spending a lot of time reading up a little bit more on what little bit is known about the Druids. Obviously, I talk about both of these topics in a lot of my YouTube videos, and I was trying to find some way of experimenting and figuring out how I can start piecing things together a little bit more. I ran across two creation stories when it comes to the I'm almost loath to say Celtic at this point because I don't really think it is Celtic. And what I mean by that is I feel like a lot of the reconstruction stories on where stuff supposedly came from has been adjusted and adapted from hearsay. There's two that stand out the most, right? So one of the creation stories, it talks about, and actually I took some notes. I'm actually going to pull it up here. So I was able to find the source, and I found the source of these two stories about where we might have been created from another YouTuber, which is what I want to do. I want to share like factual information to be able to dig this stuff out. So in one of the creation stories, it talks about basically the idea of there was this horse, this mare made of sea foam, and let's see, the name was Yocha. Probably butchering that because I don't speak old Irish and I don't speak Celtic languages at all. And basically, the idea was this tree had grown and the horse had come up out of the water onto the land to this tree, and it gave birth to the first god, Cernunnos, which is interesting because Cernunnos is usually not listed as being like the main one. Heathenism has a creation story. Oh yeah, heathenism absolutely has a creation story, and I'll go over that one next. Specifically, I was talking about the Celtic Druid ones because I was talking about the two things I was reading about, even though this is, of course, supposed to be themed off of knowing where we had come from, specifically with some of the modern Viking Age sources. Uh, but with this particular one, like I was saying, so basically there's this tree and it was out of the sea foam, but we actually see that this was a recreation story. It doesn't actually exist. It was a couple folks from some college universities that pieced together and came up with their own creation story. Then there's another one where it talks about these two gods that were connected. It was a male and a female, and they had children, and the children couldn't be born because the god and goddess wouldn't separate, and one of the children ended up killing the god and slicing him into pieces, and his pieces fell to the earth, and then the three first gods were born. And this creation story likewise is also a fabrication, and it was an idea, and I actually was able to find the sources on that, which I thought was interesting. So I do that, and I find that there's no actual record from a Celtic Irish standpoint of a creation story. There is one for heathenry. So in heathenism, I guess that's one word for it because they didn't really have a name for what they used to practice, and we don't have a lot of records. What we do have is we have a creation story that talks about Ymir, who was a giant, and Ymir was being fought and was killed and slain by Odin Villeneuve. And depends on the story. Some people attribute it to Villeneuve, others. Odin's always listed. There's some other gods that might have been different names for those gods. And once they killed Ymir, they destroyed his body, broke it up, and created the earth. So they talk about like his eyelashes made the border between our world and the other realms because there's 9 realms in the Scandinavian traditions. And his blood became the seas, and his body became, and his bones became the rocks and the mountains. And basically, we were basically on Ymir. And when they were done creating this world, which they called Mithengarther, which I'm butchering the pronunciation a little bit, Odin Villeneuve's 2 brothers came down to Earth, and they saw 2 pieces of driftwood. One was an elm tree, one was an ash tree, Asker and Elmla, and they carved them into the figure of a man and a woman. And they ended up breathing life into them. They gave them free will and gave them the spark of life. So each of the different deities gave a different gift, and I can't remember all of them off the top of my head. And that was the first man and woman, which is interesting because it's very, very, very similar to what some of the Christian mythology does, where they talk about Adam and Eve, but this is ash and elm, basically, for the first man and woman, which I find fascinating. That's sort of the creation story there, as far as from a heathen standpoint. And I can't remember the exact Edda or saga it came from. I've read it a few times, and it goes back even a little bit further. It goes back to the point in time where you had the land of fire, which I think is Muspelheim, and then you had the land of ice. And I don't think it was Niflheim. It might have been Niflheim. And between them, there is a great divide of nothingness, which they refer to as Gunungagat. And when the 2 realms came together, the fire from Muspelheim started melting the ice from, I believe it was Niflheim, like I said. Don't quote me on that. And as it slowly melted away, a cow came out of it who then licked out the first giant, which was Ymir. which is the first of the Mjolnir. That was the giant that ended up getting slain by Odin. So then it continues into that. So it goes back even a little bit further of where even they came from. So it's pretty fascinating though. It's pretty wild. What I like about some of the stuff though is being able to study some of these stories, and then they have these rune stones which kind of match up with some of the stories. And what I mean by rune stones, people think of rune stones like the little ones that you read, which that could be a conversation in and of itself. But specifically, I was talking about these large tablets that display these pictures, and they have runic characters on the outside sometimes, or sometimes they're just picture stones, but they're called rune stones, and they depict some of these sagas and eddas, what they're talking about, because they didn't write down the sagas and eddas during the Viking era. They wrote it down afterwards. I believe the Viking era, let me check my notes. I want to say it ended in about 1100 CE. Let me see. I know I've got one here with timelines. I've got so many notes. That's the big thing, is notes on top of notes on top of notes. And you get to see a different side of me. Instead of practicing and cutting out my mistakes, you get to hear me fumble over words and double check my notes live. Okay, so it looks like Sweden converted, and the Viking era ended in 1066 CE. And then we had about a 200-year time period where it was pretty much dead and gone. 1270 CE, we get the Poetic Edda, and that's where Snorri Sturluson in Iceland started writing down some of these stories. So there's like a debate on whether or not these stories, like how real or authentic they might have been. But I think he was trying to capture what he had heard. I mean, he himself may have been a Christian potentially. That's what a lot of individuals believed. But I'd heard other people talk about the fact that his father was still part of the old ways, potentially. I don't know. It's hard to tell. Well, that's good to know. Yeah, it's pretty cool. I don't know. I like talking about that kind of stuff. So let's see. I think this live would be better if I can figure out my camera, and if I can figure out getting more light into this room, since I'm sitting in a dark room. I always sit in the dark. I've got light sensitive eyes, so I actually prefer sitting in the dark. So what else is on your mind? Are you still here, Soaring Eagle, or is that Rob Grey Wolf, or maybe someone else? Who all is hanging out? Feel free to join chat and share your thoughts, conversations, opinions. We can take the conversation wherever you want. We can talk about sources, good ones to read, good ones to watch. Still you. Cool. Awesome. Yeah, I saw there's one viewer and I wasn't sure. I wonder, see if I click on that. No, it doesn't show me who's watching. I was wondering if like there's a way. Yeah, participants right here. I can see who the participants are. That's pretty cool. And toggles timestamps. You're still here as well, Rob Greywolf? Oh, cool. Thanks. Glad you're here as well. Okay, now it shows you again. For a second there, it showed only Soaring Eagle, which is fine. I'm just kind of curious. Like I said, I'm trying to get used to this live thing. Since I don't do lives for YouTube yet, I think this is the second one I've experimented with. And the first one I experimented with on my phone. Real quick, though, how's the audio quality? Because I'm using my nice Audio Technica microphone here. Please ignore the mess. I have no idea how to hide that in the corner there. My wife's going to be thrilled. Probably not going to save this live. I will probably just have this as a fun little experiment and then delete it afterwards. Yeah, that's about as close as I can get it to my chair. Let's see. I don't know if I can put this somewhere up here. Maybe I can do this. I can do that, but then that opens that side up, doesn't it? Of course it does. And you can see my desk filled with crap. Okay, how's that? I'll just have to play with it later. I don't want to play with it too much more right now. Clearly, my my thing's not too great though. The audio is fine. I have another tab open. It was on Facebook. Maybe why it didn't. That's very possible since the tab wasn't active, which is fine. I mean, I appreciate you just listening in. Period. Always nice to interact with folks. The microphone can be scratchy when you get too close. That's understandable. So maybe I put it back here a little bit and give myself some space so it's not too much breath noises in there since it's very sensitive. Do you think any references of physical objects are left from the Viking age? They absolutely are. I actually did a video where I had shown artifacts that I actually got to see in person when I went to the museum, and they were fascinating artifacts. So we do have a lot of artifacts. Most of the stuff that we find, particularly if we talk about writing specifically, we would find, and it's the younger Futhark. It's not the Elder Futhark. A lot of people think the Elder Futhark was the language Old Norse was written in, and that's actually just not the case. Elder Futhark, they stopped using right around 800 CE, which is a couple years after the Viking era started, which I want to say it was 790 something. Checking my notes again. Let's see, 793 is when the Viking age started. So what they ended up doing is they switched to the younger Futhark. So the Elder Futhark has 24 runes in it, and it's phonic. It was for reading and writing. And then the younger Futhark has 16. So you have some characters that represent multiple sounds. So it's very hard to translate and read. I'm attempting to begin the journey of learning how to read it. I can't right now. I can speak a little Icelandic, but that's not written in runes. So the younger Futhark, they would take it and they would label stuff, like they would put the owner's name on it, or they would put like a little tag, like for like if somebody owned a comb, they had the maker's name on it or who they gifted it to. They found combs with poems on it, talking about it was given to a wife from a husband type of a deal. They have found labels that you would essentially put on your bag or your luggage, like if you're traveling and carrying packages or you're a merchant, you would label your materials. So they found tags like that. Then, of course, they found those rune stones that I was mentioning, but they also found a whole bunch of stuff. Like they found grooming supplies like picks and tweezers. They found combs, axe heads, spear heads, swords, shields, hammers, different type of carpentry stuff, different type of blacksmith stuff. They've found nails from ships. They have found a lot of stuff from the Viking Age, and it is fantastic to see, as well as a lot of pendants. Mjolnir, Thor's hammer. They found this one obviously is not a artifact. I don't even think it's based off of a historical Mjolnir. It's just one that I like and I bought for myself. But they found a lot of pendants for Mjolnir. They found some sword pendants, axe pendants. They found quite a few things. So yeah, there's a lot of artifacts left. I still cannot roll my R yet. Rolling the R is very difficult. I struggle with it. So sometimes I'll say names like Ragnarok, Ragnarok, and sometimes I do it great. And other times I completely lose it altogether. You have that, like at the end of Seither, there's an R, Seither. So I try to, like, if you can try to do like a drum roll with your mouth, like if you try to get that noise, it's not super authentic, but it at least gives a little bit more emphasis than trying to not roll it whatsoever. I find my family, because my family's from Iceland on my mom's side, I find they understand me better if I speak slower. So if I say, and I repeat this in so many of my videos because it's the easiest phrase to say. If I say I speak a little Icelandic, yeh is I, or refers to the self. Yeh. Talar, and there's an R. So again, I didn't roll that R too well, but talar is to speak. So I speak. Yek talar. Bara doesn't have a R in it. It's like Bala. Bara small vase. Bara small vase, which means very little, very small. So yeah, I speak very small, very little, and then you say the Icelandic word for Icelandic, which is Íslenskur. So, ég talar bara smálves Íslenskur. And if I say it real quick, ég talar bara smálves Íslenskur, I don't get any of the rolls. It's really hard to understand me. But when I slow it down and really enunciate, that's when it's easier to understand what I'm saying. Ég talar bara smálves Íslenskur. And then it's like, oh, okay, now I can understand you. Ég skil. I understand. Ég skil. I mean, for me, the northern timber is there, but I don't think I can draw it out yet, leading me to think that I have a line from there, but it's not obvious given the situation. Fair enough. Fair enough. I don't know. I don't know if speaking or rolling R's is necessarily something that's inherited genetically, or it's just something that you learn and get comfortable with over time. Could always do if you're interested, if there's a connection there, just in general, or maybe that was just a passing comment. There's always DNA testing, which I think is fantastic and a lot of fun. I did that. I being connected to these people, they traveled, and I am all over the place. My DNA is, I'm very much a mutt, very much a mutt. One thing I do like is that a lot of the sources are readily available. You can find them online. I've found links and I've posted them at the bottom of videos where you can read translations. And of course, you can buy some too. Jackson Crawford, great translations. I've got a couple of his books. But William R. Short, also a fan of his work. I've got his Men of Terror book. And I've actually was able to speak to him a few times. He actually answered a few of my emails, which was great. He had made the suggestion in one of his videos that you take the time to learn and teach yourself Old Norse and translate it yourself. So I want to get there. It's going to be hard, and I know it. Is necromancy the darkest art? How widespread was it? So necromancy, I cannot find any evidence of it being practiced in olden times. Today, it's practiced a little bit more. I would not call it the darkest art by any means. One thing to keep in mind that a lot of people don't understand when it comes to actual necromancy, this is a word that is associated with foretelling and communicating with the dead. People think of like raising the dead, and that's not the case. The suffix mancy refers to divination. So geomancy is doing earth divination. Necromancy is doing dead divination. And there's different ways to do it. So technically, depending on who you speak with, you can consider being a medium or speaking with the dead as just communicating with spirits is technically a form of necromancy, depending on who you speak to. There is a very archaic example of something that could be classified as necromancy as well, depending on who you speak with. That's no longer practiced. If it is practiced, I'm not aware of it, and it's not something I would endorse. But back in the day, there were tribes that would read the entrails of animals. Something I think people need to keep in mind, although that's horrific to think about, and the idea and the imagery there is pretty disturbing, is you're going to slaughter the animal to eat it. So doing a reading before you eat it, it's part of their butchering process. So it's part of their culture. I don't think that's practiced today, and I really hope it's not practiced today, but that technically could fall into the classification of necromancy as well. Just my opinion, though. Ghost hunters are necromancers. You consider ghost hunters necromancers? I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. Usually, I would consider ghost hunters would fall into the classification maybe of paranormal investigators or just ghost hunters, just in general. I think ghost hunters, modern ghost hunters, will vary on how they take it. Some don't believe in ghosts and they're trying to prove that they don't exist. Some take it from a scientific perspective and use scientific equipment to measure different things like I think it's EMF waves, listening to audio recordings and doing different types of like camera settings such as night vision to try to pick up activity where there might be spiritual activity. And then there are some that might even take it to the point of doing psychic work as well. They speak with spirits, but that was Oh, I see what you're saying. So yes. So in a way, if they're trying to speak with spirits, yeah, that would be classified as a form of necromancy if you wanted to. I think that might be stretching it a bit, but I could see that. I've actually heard some individuals say that utilizing the Necronomicon, those individuals that utilize the Necronomicon, is technically a form of necromancy as well. But again, it's when you talk about vague terms like that, it's been reused and recycled so many times. I find it hard to really track it down to authentic sources. Hey, I'm going to butcher your name. Sadaqua, but I've seen you many times leaving comments on my channel. Good to see you on here on the live. Some have a natural gift to speak with spirits. They don't have to reach out necessarily. They can just be contacted. Indeed. Some people that I've spoken to have almost referred to it as a curse because they hear the dead even when they don't want to, which to me, the not having the ability to turn it off would be horrific, I would imagine, especially if you're trying to sleep. However, some use mediums. Fair. I have seen people use, like I said, take psychics on their expeditions for their paranormal investigations. I got to do a paranormal investigation a couple of times, which was a lot of fun. There was a house that we explored, and there was a individual, and for whatever reason, he took a whole bunch of guns, entered his house, and I believe it was on an Easter Sunday, and unloaded at everyone sitting in the kitchen, and then proceeded through the rest of the house, slaughtering his family. And it was so bad that the floor joists were stained with blood. Absolutely horrific murder. But happened to know somebody who does do work as a medium, and he knew the person who was selling the house. And he said, "Hey, Blaze, we're going to do a paranormal investigation in this house because they're showing it and nobody's living there right now. You want to come check it out?" I was like, "Sure, let's go check it out." Pretty disturbing. Definitely had to feel like there was something there. It was, I don't know, it definitely had some sort of feel to it. But a lot of people never said that they saw things. But you would assume something like that with some sort of horrific act happening there might leave a residue. Your FYI? UVR FYI. Okay, welcome. Sadaka. Okay, Sadaka. Well, welcome. And it is not great having your toe touched at night or having a spirit that just follows you around for years, right? I mean, if I was going through that, I would express to the entity that, hey, I don't like that. Could you please respect boundaries? But I mean, I guess it depends on your relationship with that particular spirit. Hello, K creature. Welcome to the stream. Why doesn't the dead most evil demons just possess everyone? What's stopping that type of invasion? So in my personal opinion, from my research and studies, the dead has no power over the living. So in essence, they cannot take possession of you unless you would allow it. It's your body, you're inhabiting it, and whether it be by divine intervention or maybe your own willpower and natural protections, I don't think most even have the ability to. When you start talking about things like demons, I'm of a mixed mind of that. I'm constantly changing my mind based upon research and personal experience. And I have never ran across the demon personally. And I question that if it's not just a name for an entity that might not necessarily be what people assume it is. And most of them probably don't do much interaction with our world. And if they can interact with our world, I don't see what their end game would be. So I think combination of this is our world and other entities can't interact with it too well as maybe some sort of divine protection. That is why I think we don't see it more widespread. I have heard of incidences before, and I kind of wonder if it's not a psychological mental disorder, if it's genuinely something that they're engaging with from another realm. So that's my thoughts on it, at least. Just my opinion. Have you ever had an out-of-body experience or astral projection? If so, what was your experience like? I've had some crazy obes. Possibly. So I tend to have lucid dreams, and I know not everybody has those, apparently. I don't know what other people dream, but in a lot of my dreams, I'm usually pretty aware, and I typically have abilities. Like I can fly, I can make things like happen in front of me, I can move objects with my mind, I can like have elements appear in my hand, like flame, fire, light, things like that. So I don't know if some of those lucid dreams was an astral projection or if it was just a lucid dream. So I'm not sure if I've actually had an actual out of body experience. I believe when I've been awake, if I've attempted to project my awareness, it feels just like a visualization. It doesn't feel like I'm actually out of my body when I'm awake. My father's done astral projection before. He actually told me about his experience. He said one time he was getting himself into a meditative state, and he remembers feeling himself being weightless and lifted out of his body. And he remembers floating up to the top of the house and sitting on the roof. And he told me he heard voices and it freaked him out. And he instantly snapped back to his body and hasn't tried it since, as far as I know. We haven't talked about it in a while. But that was the one experience I heard from him. I know I've had other people tell me about experiences, but I don't remember most of theirs. Can also set up boundaries on your own. Indeed, they have no power unless you invite or allow it. 100% agree with you there. I do grounding and also call on my own spirit. Totally different kind of spirit to protect me. Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, banishing is probably one of the first things that I would recommend folks research if you do have any sort of interaction with other realms. Very interesting. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, just my thoughts. And you'll hear me say that a lot for a very specific reason. When you start talking about topics like this and you start talking about potential paranormal things, it comes down to opinions and personal experience. And those can change with time. So just because I say something doesn't mean it's etched in stone. In fact, it's just what I've run across so far. Wonder if this would help. Aha. Yeah, that allows you to see me a little bit better if I put up a white background on my desktop here. I'm like I said, I'm sitting in the dark. There we go. We'll illuminate this screen over here. I'll open up my notepad. There we go. Now I can have some light. Hey, look, you can see me. All right. I don't mind guiding the conversation with thoughts and questions from the chat. Is there other thoughts individuals have? If not, I'll start rambling on, which I don't mind doing. I like hearing myself speak. My wife teases me a lot. She asks me sometimes why I make so many YouTube videos. And I was like, and I've joked with her and I was like, I like hearing myself speak. And honestly, I really do. Scary run, right? Soaring eagle. Yeah. Well, the lighting, so you'll notice there's kind of like an orange tint to it. Since I have light sensitive eyes, and it's not like I can't be in the light, it's just it'll cause me headaches and migraines over time. So what I typically tend to do is I use a filter, a blue screen filter called Flux. So even though it's a white background, it's got an orange tint, which removes the blue light. It also is supposed to help you sleep. So if I was to turn it off, let me see if I disable it for an hour, you'll see it really light up here. Okay, ready? Oh, it's just too bright. So now you can see me clearly, but oh, that's going to be super uncomfortable. So I'm turning my filter back on. All right, here we go. So that's why there's the orange tint to it. Is because I got a filter on my screen called Flux. Is there a Wiccan version of Valentine's? Not that I've ever come across. But my research into Wicca is very, very limited. And depending on who you speak to, some individuals are very, very, very traditional with their practices, and others are very by the seat of their pants, and they call themselves Wiccan because they don't know what else to call themselves. I so loved taking your advice with the winter altar. Kind of wanted to do a love altar on the window still now. Oh, cool. I'm glad that was helpful for you. What ate your thoughts on Thor, my son, studying at the moment? Are not 8. What are your thoughts on Thor, my son, studying at the moment? Oh, we could have a welcome to stream, by the way, Purple Magistar. So when it comes to Thor, it depends on where you want to start. I could have a very, very, very long conversation about that deity. I guess the first thing I think about is I think about the fact that media has ruined the image of Thor. So if you take it from the Old Norse, it's Thor. It's got a rolling R. You have the symbol of thorn followed by an O and two R's when you spell it in Old Norse. And that's when you do the Greek alphabet Romanized version of it. Thor himself is typically a little bit more slow and dim-witted, the way he's portrayed in the Eddas and sagas. He is the son of Odin. So he's obviously Thor, Odin's son. He usually is associated with Mjolnir. Interesting thing about Thor, and I did a YouTube video on this. You can go check it out too. And it has, Mjolnir is not a weapon. And I have a picture of Thor from the MCU because that's the image a lot of people think when they think of Thor. And the reason I specifically pointed that out is not only does Thor not have Mjolnir for most of his life, it's actually something he got after his wife's hair, Sif. All of her hair was cut off by Loki. So Thor is waiting to go pick on the Jotnar because that's what he does. He picks on the Jotnar. And he actually flies in a chariot pulled by two goats. Well, he gets impatient waiting for Loki, who's doing whatever he's doing. So he goes anyway and he leaves. And Loki's there and he sees Thor off in the distance on his chariot flying off. And he's like, well, what am I going to do now? So he goes back to Thor's place and his wife's sleeping. And he's like, so Thor loves his wife's hair, long, blonde, beautiful hair, loves Sif's hair. So Loki sees a pair of shears, and snips off a little bit, thinking it would be funny. And then he starts snipping off some more, ends up basically shaving her bald. Thor comes back, finds out, and is furious, like goes screaming, threatening to kill Loki, punches a post and puts his fist through the post. So Loki goes to the Dwevgar, the dwarves, and wants them to basically fix her hair for her. And since they are magical in their crafts, they could basically make a wig that's like real. So they're supposed to make a magical silk wig that basically looks like real hair. And when he goes there and he's trying to get this done, he passes Etri, and what was the other dwarf's name? Two dwarven brothers. I'm sorry, I don't have all the names memorized. And he's basically starts mouthing off to them, and they have this competition. And he's going to get the dwarves. He's going to manipulate them into making it for free. So he pits two different dwarves against each other, these two brothers and dwarves that are working for him, so that he doesn't have to pay for anything. And they make a deal. If Loki's presents are better, then I forgot what he's supposed to get. But if he loses, which he does, he's supposed to give them his head. And it was during this competition that Mjolnir is actually forged. So Mjolnir, interestingly enough about Mjolnir, is they didn't have hammers as weapons in Scandinavia. You have spears, you have swords, you have axes everywhere. Technically, you can consider the shield a weapon, especially how they used it. You had a sax, which was like a single-bladed short sword. You had knives, which were less of a weapon. You have bows and arrows, and you had throwing spears. But they didn't have hammers as weapons. But Thor's always depicted with one. There's actually even a debate whether or not Mjolnir is an axe or a hammer, which is an interesting thought, depending on, because some of the pendants almost depicted like a little bit in between. Thor is the protector of Asgard, if you prefer to pronounce it that way, but Asgard is closer to the way it probably would have been pronounced, and the protector of Mithangard, or Mithangarder, which is Earth. Midgard is another name for it. He is the go-to protector. There's even stories about him, like they were worried because Thor was out beating up the giants again, like he does a lot in a lot of the Eddas and sagas, and they wanted to build a wall because if Thor's not here to protect them, they needed to protect themselves. Even though they had all the, I'm going to call them gods, but technically they weren't called gods. They were the Aesir, the Vanir, and then the Jotnar were separate. The Jotnar associated with forces of chaos, but again, this could be turning a long conversation. But basically, the Aesir and the Vanir are here in Asgard, and Thor's away, so they wanted to have a wall, and they commission a guy. And everybody, for whatever reason, all the Jotnar are obsessed with Frigg. Like, she's the hottest thing in the world. They all want to nail her. So this passerby wants to marry Frigg if he can build it in a certain amount of time. And Loki makes a deal saying that you can. And he has this horse building this wall. But I can go into that story too. That's how Sleipnir came about, and that's when Loki shapeshifted into a horse and got pregnant and ended up giving a birth to Sleipnir with his, which is Odin's horse. But the point I'm trying to make with Thor, since they're doing study, Thor was the protector, and he was that important that while he was away, they'd rather have a wall than have anyone else be trusted to protect them. And it's also interesting again that this hammer is the representation of his item and his weapon instead of any sort of other implement of war. So I find that fascinating. And like I said, I could talk about Thor for a while. There's a lot of information on him, but hopefully that at least gives you a little bit to work with. Purple status. Hey, hello. Welcome to the live. I don't do a lot of lives, but I figured I would give it a shot, and I figured I would just BS and talk about anything that you all have on your minds. Does that help at all, Purple Magister? Did you want more information? Did you want to talk more about Thor? Did you have specific questions? If I don't have answers, I'll tell you. I can only tell you what I've studied so far, what I know personally, and my personal interpretation of said topic. Yeah, no problem. It's also worth mentioning, too, that Mjolnir had really cool magical properties, such as you could throw it and it would always return to your hand. A lot of weapons did that. Gungnir did it as well, Odin's spear. Gungnir was forged at the same time. It was one of the weapons that was competing in this whole spiel here. There was a Gungnir, there was Dripnar. It's like a ring. It's an arm ring that would duplicate itself like I think it was every night it would duplicate itself or something. But basically, it was like infinite gold rings out of this one thing, which would make Odin rich, which was pretty awesome. They ended up having a boar, which you could ride, and there was a boat you could fold up and put in your pocket. There was Sif's hair, and there was Mjolnir. Mjolnir had the ability not only to return to your hand, but it could actually change size. So Thor would wear it as a pendant and hide it in a shirt, and then he could actually make it grow real big or change its shape, which was pretty fascinating. And anything that Mjolnir hit, it would break. So it could destroy pretty much anything it hit. So Thor loved that weapon. That's why he's usually associated with it. That's why it's a symbol as well. Great story. Love it. I would love to hear more and see more live stream from you. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And yeah, absolutely. I want to try to do more live. I really like interacting with people on YouTube. I do. I'll be honest. I get discouraged sometimes when I see videos and I spend hours putting them together and nobody watches. I'm sorry, few people watch them. I had one video that blew up with over 100,000 views. And then lately, the last couple of ones that I've done, I'm like, I'm not even breaking 500. And I'm like, I've got more people following my channel and I can't understand why YouTube doesn't recommend it. So that's disheartening. But I was like, I started this channel originally because I wanted to do tricks online, magic tricks, because they're fun. And then I started talking about spirituality. And I realized there's a lot of people out there searching and they are having difficulty finding references. So I was like, I'll share my experiences and my thoughts because I've been doing this for a while. I'm 40 right now. And I started when I was like 13. I was starting to question things. And then I think 14 and 15, I started reading books. And I've been getting into it ever since. And I've explored a lot of different stuff. So I thought it might be helpful for folks that are either new to it or want to bounce ideas off of each other. And then even more recently, I was like, what I think would be the most helpful is sharing the sources I'm using as well. So you'll see a new trend that I won't just mention stuff, but I'll put hyperlinks below for folks that want to read the same stuff, because I'm telling you my interpretation. That doesn't mean it's a right interpretation. So if I share that material with you and I'll let you read it yourself as well, then you can come up with your own interpretation. So that's my goal now, is just to share thoughts and talk about something I'm passionate about. And I think lives might help with that, because then you can interact live and I can answer your questions right here and now. Or I can tell you, I have no clue. Let me go look that up and I will try to make a video on it in the future. And then I can get a list of video replies. Was just trying to see what he was studying. My son is a protector of all he loves. Understandable. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Thor can be studied from many different aspects. You can study the Marvel comic book version that's fictitious and based upon the actual Aesir. You can study the old sagas and eddas. You look up the Poetic Edda, the Prose Edda, and then there's numerous sagas. Like there's tons of stuff that has been written since right around 1270 CE. We have had a lot of stuff written down over the years, and it's really cool to read about some of the stories that they went through and some of the things that they've done, not to mention the lessons that you learn. There's this constant challenge. Like I said, Thor was constantly fighting with the giants. He hated them. Even though technically they're the same beings, it's kind of like different clans, but that's another conversation. One of the times he came and he was challenged, and it was showing how he's almost dim-witted to a degree. Like he's one of those muscle-bound, I will protect everything and crush and smash everything in front of me. And they give him 3 challenges. And one of the challenges is to drain this drinking horn. And Thor, like, he's big on drinking. He's like sucking down this horn and trying to drain it dry, and it's just not going. And they tease him like, oh, yeah, you can't even drain a horn. And then there was another one where you had to try to pick up this cat off the ground, and he couldn't get all 4 paws off the ground, no matter how hard he tried, as strong as he was. And then they challenged him to a wrestling match, and nobody wanted to wrestle, this guy who obviously can't do any of these challenges already. So they get Etley, which is this old woman, and he has to try to wrestle Etley, and he cannot win. And you end up finding out, and this is like a lesson that they're teaching in this story, that the drinking horn was actually connected to the sea. So he couldn't drain it because it was like drinking all the water in the world, and that's just not possible. But they say that the tides happen from Thor trying. So by him drinking from this horn and trying to drain it and trying to drain the seas, it caused waves to occur now in the ocean, and supposedly before they didn't. And that the cat he tried to pick up was actually Jormungandr. Jormungandr is the World Serpent, which is actually one of Loki's children. And you can't pick it up because it's wrapped around the entire world. So there's no way he could have gotten the 4 paws off the ground. And Etley is the Old Norse word for old age. And no man can wrestle old age. It'll basically defeat you in the long run regardless. So it was interesting to put up these 3 challenges, which basically from a certain perspective, he interpreted them wrong and thought he'd defeat them when they were actually undefeatable. They actually tricked him. So it's just, it's really cool stuff to study. So if your son's studying that, wish him much luck, because it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. I credit you so much in my journey. It's given me the strength to allow myself to start down a spiritual path. Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. That is very kind of you to say. I'm glad that I've been able to inspire people. And when you take the time to let me know that reminds me that it is worth it to still make my videos. And even if it's only 10 people watching, it's worth it. Moments like that right there. So thank you. That made my day. All right, we're hitting 11:26, so I'm going to wrap up the live soon, but I still want to leave it open for questions or thoughts or comments or different topics that you would like me to explore with you right now, and I will do the best I can with what I know, or like I said, I will let you know that I don't know. Like when we talked earlier about necromancy, I can only tell you the little bit that I had heard about, but I am not an expert when it comes to necromancy. It is just something I've come across in some of my readings, but has never been a main focus for me. I think one thing too I would like to do in time is to start. Funny you said about swords, not hammers. He wears a sword, not the hammer. Nothing wrong with that. Actually, typically the sword is associated with one of 2 of the Aesir, either Odin or Tyr. So Tyr is one of the Aesir as well. Odin, of course, being Thor's father, is associated with, I'll say associated with, because I really don't like using terms like god of. I think that's like a Greek translation. We don't really have that in any of the sagas and eddas that I've seen. I've never seen them say of. It's usually they'll describe them and describe things that they're into and interested in. So Odin is associated with war. He's a war deity. And he not only is well versed in multiple weapons, he's also associated with magic, knowledge, and wisdom. But there has been pendants that have been found, and I've got pictures of those from the museum I visited that are sword blades. or even full swords, and they hang from a pendant around your neck, and they're believing those are associated with Odin. But then, of course, there's also Tyr. Tyr is also associated with war. He's also associated with justice. Odin is very tricky. You gotta be very, very careful, especially if you're a modern reconstructionist and you're trying to refollow the old ways that might have been practiced. Odin is out for himself. Number one in Odin's eyes is himself. Doesn't mean you can't work with him, doesn't mean you don't care, but number one is Odin. Whereas Tyr is a protector. Tyr is actually the one who nursed and took care of one of Loki's 3 children, Jormungandr's brother, which is Fenrir, the wolf Fenrir. I believe they've referred to Fenrir as Fenris too sometimes, but Fenrir is the way I understand his name. But he's actually a one-handed god. He is missing his right hand because when they found out Loki was kind of doing things on the side, cheating on his wife, and had 3 children, Hel, Jormungandr, and Fenrir, they went to pick up the children. And one of them was this wolf, Fenrir. And Tyr took care of him, raised him, spent time with him, and he kept growing and growing and growing and growing, bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Odin started freaking out. So he wanted to have him chained. And every time they did games to see if he could break the chain, he snapped it like it was nothing. He was getting so big and so powerful that they eventually went to the dwarves to get a special type of silk made that they believed he wouldn't be able to break free from. And Fenrir, being wise and sly, was like, wait a minute, I've broken all this chain. Why is this little thin rope supposed to be able to hold me? I don't trust you. Something's up. So he wants someone to stick their hand in his mouth, because if they don't release him, he's going to bite the hand off of the person. Tyr offers to do that, puts his sword hand in his mouth, which is his right hand. And of course, when they bind him, every time he struggles, instead of it snapping, it gets tighter. And of course, he ends up biting off Tyr's hand. So Tyr's depicted with one hand, but the sword is usually associated with him as well. Sword was very much a prestige weapon back in the Viking era. When you had to prepare for either battle and war or going on a Viking, Viking was an action. A lot of people will say Viking as a person. We use it that way today, but back then it was called Viking. Viking is something you did. And when you did that, you would want weapons. The typical weapon was an axe, because you could use that for farming and for daily life, but you could also use it for battle. Iron was readily available, but wasn't really good for weapons. Steel was. You needed iron to make steel, but when you convert iron into steel, you add carbon. And what you can have is you can have what's called slag. These are like little occultations of impurities that basically make the weapon brittle. The larger you make a weapon, the more brittle it becomes. So an axe head, pretty stable, pretty good to use. Arrowhead, spearhead, you're in good shape. Even a sax, if you wanted to use a short single-bladed knife, not too bad. When you get to a sword, not only is that a lot of steel, so that's expensive, only the elite could afford that, but it would snap and break in most cases. So in order to get a high-quality steel sword, that's when they had to start researching or trading to get better steel, better quality steel to make some of these better swords. So when you talk about a warrior with a sword, they would typically also have like the skull cap. They did not have horns. Chainmail, again, a prestige thing for the elite, for the nobles, but having that sword was a status thing too. So usually the Aesir are associated with swords when you talk about sword pendants, but there's nothing wrong with wearing a sword pendant instead. Loves Odin. Good with runes. Nice. In future, I would like to know more about some of the ceremonies or practices, like the reading of the entrails would fascinate me, or runes, marriage ceremonies, burials, etc. Oh, absolutely. And all of those topics could be very long conversations. I will let him know and have him watch you. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I've been doing a little bit more videos lately because people seem to be very interested in it. With it being part of my heritage, I'm interested in it. I've been doing more reading recently. I'm not an expert. It was really, really hard to find a lot of sources on the Scandinavian stuff. Most of my stuff has come more recently because I ran across people like Jackson Crawford. Back in my day, a lot of the scholarly folks, Jackson Crawford made a quote, and he said, a lot of these scholars and researchers will sit in their ivory tower and not share any of the information. And he's trying to break that and have it more easily distributed. And then people like William R. Short, Erith Harger, uh, Erithurger, I think that's how you say his name. It sounds like that's what he says in those videos, are fantastic sources. So I've been researching a lot more, and I've been finding out things I didn't know. I believe I made a video like 10 years ago, and I referred to the revival movement specifically as Asatru. And at the time, I didn't know any different. Now I know more about the term Asatru as a modern term, and I also found out that there is an Icelandic version of it, which is pronounced with the accent Ásatru, and Ásatru is nothing like Asatru. Asatru was invented here in the United States. Ásatru is from Ásatrúar Felagith back in 1972, I think, 72, 73. But they're a group that are a reconstruction group, and their name specifically means like faith in the old gods. But technically, Aus, the Aesir, is one group of the gods. It's not all of them. So technically, it's faith in the Aesir versus faith in all of the gods, because you have the Aesir, which are basically like your sky deities, your justice ones, your elite noble ones. They were of order and protection and power higher up. Then you had your Vanir. These were the deities of the earth. They were of the people, farming and crops and homes and hearth. And then you have your Jotnar, which are the giants, and the Jotnar are forces of chaos and destruction. Not necessarily always bad, because destruction has to happen for creation to exist. You have to cut and hew a tree in order to build something of wood. You have to mine out ore in order to make metal. Things like that. Yeah, talking a little bit about the runes, because I mentioned them earlier. One of the frustrations that I've always had is, so a lot of people know what the Elder Futhark are to a degree. Elder Futhark was a script written for Proto-Germanic peoples. They stopped using them around 800, and then they switched to the younger Futhark. So they went from 24 runes set of the Elder Futhark to 16 runes. We don't know how to use them or read them. And I've been doing some research recently, and I'm trying to find sources of how do they use these runes, because a lot of people use them for divination and casting. They do bind runes, where they combine multiple runes together to make sigils. And I'm like, okay, well, where did all this stuff come from? I finally found the source. The oldest source I can find, doesn't mean it's right, it's the oldest one I've found so far, is you have the Icelandic and Norwegian rune poems. And these break down all the runes and pretty much match to a T how people read them today in Elder Futhark. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to find the age of these poems, and I believe most of them are from around 1200 CE, maybe 1300 CE, that ballpark. So they are more modern things. So we're not sure how they used to use the runes back in the day. It's also interesting to note that back in the day, there's no guarantee that people were actually using the runes for any form of magic. People today will say that, but it's more like just an alphabet, and that's it. Now, we say the runes actually came from Odin. There was a story of Odin. It's specifically in the Hávamál, or as I prefer to pronounce it, the Hávamál. In the Hávamál, it actually has a story about Odin sacrificing himself to himself. He hangs himself from the branches of Isidril, which is the world tree that connects the 9 realms. It's an ash tree. And when he's hanging there, he stabs himself in the side with his spear, Gungnir, and he hangs there. I think it's like 7 days and 7 nights, or maybe it's 9 days and 9 nights. Ooh, I need to double check that. But anyway, he gets visions of the runes and carves them into the trunk of Isidril, Yggdrasil. And that's where we got the runes from. I've heard people make the argument like, well, why would he hang himself just for writing system? Because writing is powerful. Writing is super powerful. That's how we share thoughts and ideas and keep things recorded in history. They didn't write very much back then. So to be introduced into writing would make sense of that being a reason. Then we do have some stories in the Eddas and Sagas. So for example, Fafnir, depending on how you do the pronunciation on it, but Fafnir is the most common English pronunciation. Usually people think of him as a dragon, basically like a long serpent, not necessarily a traditional dragon in the English sense, more like the Dreki serpent dragons from Iceland. And he's actually a dwarf, and he actually shapeshifted in this big dragon. And Sigurd was the hero of this story, is going to slay the evil Fafnir. And during that, they're telling him how to use runes and certain symbols that he's supposed to use that are supposed to enchant his sword. They don't say how to use them, but they talk about using specific runes. And that's interesting. So there's references to it. Eat Skallagrimsson, there is a story of him going to visit a jarl, which is like a king, and he is served a goblet of mead, and he supposedly carved runes into the table and spoke a spell over them, and the cup vibrated and jumped off the table and broke. So he knew they poisoned it, which they did. So he pulled out his sword and he slaughtered everyone and killed them for trying to poison them. So there are examples of them saying that they did, but we don't know how they used to. And there's theories that some believe that the runes were just used as a writing system, and that the rune poems were basically to teach you to memorize them. I forget, there's like a terminology for that. A mnemonic device, I think, is, yeah. So a lot of people are theorizing if it was a mnemonic device or if they were actually used for divinatory purposes or not. We have found some, I guess technically you would translate it into amulets or talisman. I have the word written down. I was actually just studying this recently. So you have this magic system called Tolfr. Tolfr was like creating talismans or amulets. And we have some amulets that you can look up yourself. And I've got some pictures, which I don't know how to share my screen to share the pictures. But there is an amulet of Kinevic, Kvinneby. You can look up this amulet online, and it's a little copper plate, and it's got runes carved in it, and it's actually like a rune poem, and it's written out as script. So it's not like a rune for protection; it's a writing for protection. They write out a huge thing to wear as a protective amulet versus just a rune or two. So it's really fascinating. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting things we could talk about with that. So I could definitely turn that into its own video for sure. The French Whisperer has recently done some vids about the story mythology of the gods. He has the story of the runes and Odin. Nice. Typically, Odin is spelled I-N, just for the record. If there's a spelling for it, Ian, I'm not aware of it. And I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm just sharing what information I'm familiar with. So just my thoughts. But that would be cool. I'd be very interested in reading that. I'm always down for learning and reading about more stuff. I will let them know and have them watch. Okay, I read that already. Cool. All right. Well, we're hitting almost midnight now, so I think I'm going to wrap up the live for now. I want to thank everyone for hanging out. As always, if you are subscribed, thank you. If you're not, consider subscribing. And I've got some more video on this stuff on my channel, so feel free to watch sometime. And maybe I'll do a live again, and I'll try to have more light so you can actually see me. But anyway, bye for now. And as coming to be my new saying that I'm going to end most of my videos with, remember, question everything. Yep. Good night. Go the nacht. If you speak Icelandic. If you don't, that's good night.